That's why I like you. I didn't see it.
So it is now the official clothing of Chevy truck.
Oh.
And Chevy truck is the official vehicle of
Carhartt.
Carhartt.
Oh.
Because it's two, they're presenting it as being two Detroit icons.
Right. That's
Interesting.
not bad
I guess.
for Chevy.
Yeah, possibly.
Look, Chevy needs the help. You guys saw the truck numbers, man.
Oh, yeah, you see the inventories?
Official
No.
clothing of Chevy truck.
Oh.
Okay.
How come I can hear myself?
Yeah. So,
It's a
no,
time-
what's
it's
the
a-
inventory
it's a
on
time-
Silverado and
180?
No, 08. 108.
108?
on
Just looked-
Silverado?
Automotive News. I just looked at it. Yeah, I had the same exact reaction that you just did.
Wow.
That was precisely my reaction, except I can't whistle quite that well.
Yeah, yeah.
That was, yeah. I might have used a barnyard expletive.
Yeah, right. Well, I was stunned at Ram sales. And I don't care, you can talk discounts, an old classic truck and blah, 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 all you want. They sold a lot of trucks.
Yeah. They found a market clearing price.
And I was just looking up the diesel sales. 1 out of 4 has a diesel.
Get out of here.
Really? Holy
1 out of 4.
I didn't know that.
Highest take rate for the pickup segment.
Wow.
Ford sells more diesels, but a slightly lower take rate, about 20%, 1 out of 5.
Party like it's 2007.
And you know, I had to look. They charge like $6,000 to $9,000, depending on
The
for
upcharge.
those engines.
Yeah, people
It's
love 'em.
unreal.
I know, that whole segment is unreal. I mean, it's not on topic anyway, but you know, like, you have an oligopoly, you figure, okay, we can manage price in an oligopoly, right? And then you start having a price war in an oligopoly, like who does that?
Right.
Well, our guys do that.
Right.
So let's,
Right.
that's great, it's great.
Yeah, but you know, I think the price war is.
It might be over, it might be a
I
little
think
more
it's
smoke
overdone
than,
because you know you see these GMC or Silverado, $11,000 off.
that's not all Silverado. Yeah, no, I understand that, yeah.
Right.
Well, but aren't those also the really high-end ones that they're advertising?
With the big numbers like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
for sure. You know.
No, they've got a lot of, I mean, obviously they've got a lot of margin to play with.
Right.
And so,
It's not the contractor special that's going
no,
to.
but still, I
going
think
out
there's,
there.
I mean, nonetheless, I think there's a lot of price, I mean, it was Todd Eckert, I guess, at Ford, I asked him about this. He said, is this unusual? He said, well, yeah, because you'd think that both of these companies, his competitors, have brand new trucks. Usually that's not when you're doing the big headline discounts, right? You kind of wait until you're a couple of years into the program to do that stuff.
Yeah.
Or you'd actually expect Ford to be doing that stuff because they're on year 5 or something.
Last year, I mean, the new one comes next year.
So anyway, it's just interesting, the dynamic in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting is if you think about it, I mean, you're mentioning the classic or whatever they're calling the
old
Ram,
truck.
The old truck.
That people are completely willing to buy those.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
They're
yeah.
fine.
Well, I mean, the old Ram is a pretty good looking truck. Perfectly fine.
right.
It was perfectly fine last year.
I know.
You know, before the new one came out.
Right.
Well, right, but
So,
yeah.
and
Anyway,
I couldn't say what the discount is to the new truck, but it's significant enough that enough people go, yeah, I'll take the
yeah.
old one.
No, I think that's
You've already paid for the tooling,
Right.
so
ages ago.
Well, not only that, but you know, a lot of truck sales are fleets. Fleets don't care about
fleets
the
don't
screen in the middle of the
No,
dash.
in fact,
They want the lowest
no,
price they
that's
can
right.
get.
Yeah. But I see a lot of them around.
I'm driving a Ram, test driving a Ram right now. That is such a nice driving truck.
Yeah, it
Going
is.
down the
It is.
freeway,
It is.
man, does that thing cruise nice.
Yeah. No, it really is. I've driven it. It is. It's yeah. It's a large sedan
it
substitute.
doesn't feel like a truck.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you know,
magical.
What was Detroit always good at? Body on frame.
Frame, V8
Rear drive, V8 power.
They haven't changed the way they make money in 70 years.
I figured the only hope for Detroit is that, you know, all this talk about skateboard with electrics, it's really just body on frame.
Body
They
on-
should do fine.
It's body on frame. Once they internalize that, it's like, it'll
Yeah,
be
right.
fine.
Because it's true, a body on frame vehicle rides different than a unit body. It just does. And there's pros and cons to either one. And you can tune each one to mimic the other.
Yeah.
But a body on frame just feels different. I don't know. I can't put in words what I feel.
Yeah, also, but it's also cheaper to kind of maintain and cheaper to kind of redo it, cheaper to keep it going. I mean,
That's what they say. I'm not sure I totally buy that. I mean, if the crash structure was built into the frame, or a good chunk of the crash structure, then I would say yes. Because now all I have to do is put a different top hat on the thing. But, you know, when they refresh unit body cars anyway, they're just changing the sheet metal. They're not changing the
they're not
structure
changing the
of the
structure,
vehicle.
yeah.
So I'm not convinced. I don't know. Would you know better, Paul? Is body on frame cheaper?
No, I don't know. I don't know if it's cheaper, but I do know, you know, when you look at all the other global segments, you know, that's a shrinking segment, you know. So, so now the skateboard concept may change that, but I don't know specifically from that point of view.
Gary, you driven anything good recently, or what have you?
Paul and I were just talking. So I've got the John Cooper Works Mini Nights Edition, which basically means it's all murdered out, everything's black.
Yeah.
And it is a hell of a lot of fun to drive, but it would be impossible to own that as your primary vehicle. I mean, it's
just too rough.
Well, no. I mean, it's just there's no space.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's
too
just
small. Yeah.
you know, it was. You know, as I was mentioning to Paul, that if you go to Costco and you buy one of those big Bounty, you know, multi-pack
Yeah.
things, you'd stick that in the back of the thing. You're done.
That's it.
That's it. You know, you got room for nothing else. But I mean, in terms of, you know, being a blast to drive, I mean,
Yeah. So you're going to have a lot of fun making 18 trips back and forth.
that would probably be the case. But
I was telling him that's my wife's, you know, sort of, you know, I talk about owning, you know, a Ferrari, a Porsche. She talks about having a Mini. So I was telling him we live here in Northville and we're half a mile to the Kroger, and you know, he was saying, well, she could get, you know, a bag, but anything more than that, you know, it's just not practical for anything other than driving around.
no.
No.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Nice looking car, too.
I think we're going to start now.
Are we on? All right.
Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Vasilash, Gary, how be ye?
I'm doing really well. You know, I'm a sucker for numbers. You may have noticed that over the years.
I can't help but notice.
So there'll be another number later on, but
Yeah.
today I got this news release from Delta. We fly on Delta a lot. And,
Yeah.
so it pointed out that there is a study done, best places for millennials to work. So this was done by Fortune magazine and by an organization called Great Places to Work. And Delta was number 61 on that list. And so I said, I want to see if there are any car companies on the list, because we got the labor negotiations will be starting here next week, and you know, presumably you want millennials to become involved, and the closest thing I could find was CarMax at number 69.
Really?
So there you go.
Man.
But anyway, be that as it may.
Yeah. We got to tell everybody we got Joe White from Reuters here. Always good to have you, Joe.
Good to be here.
And our special guest today is Paul Eichenberg from Paul Eichenberg Strategic Consulting. Paul, great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
So the audience knows who you are. Quick thumbnail sketch.
So a quick thumbnail sketch. So I spent 25 years in the automotive supplier world. Last 8, 9 in a corporate role, I was with Magna as the VP of Corporate Development and Strategy for Magna Powertrain and Magna Electronics. So since have built a consultancy really focusing on how suppliers transition with all this technology disruption. How do these businesses transition to really the new automotive industry? So So that's my focus.
Yeah, no, good stuff. So the transition, you mean electric cars, autonomous cars, connectivity, mobility, et cetera.
Yep, exactly. And actually, I add one more to that. I think there's a fifth element that's starting to really to evolve in the supply base. And the fifth element of disruption is really data monetization. So we're starting to see some suppliers already starting to monetize data. Companies like Mobileye, Aptiv, Bosch. These are all companies that are already monetizing data when it comes
give
to...
us a for instance. How do you take, and I'm going to say data, I got this Midwestern twang, right? But how do you take that data and monetize it?
So that's where companies like Mobileye, for instance, what they're doing is they're capturing camera data. So Mobileye supplies software algorithms for cameras that do object detection, classification. That's really a key enabler of ADAS and autonomous vehicle technologies. What they're doing is they're capturing data for the OEMs that allow them to capture that. And then what they're doing is they're transforming that up to a cloud that then goes to map companies like HD Maps, TomTom, Here. And what they're doing is they're building maps for autonomous driving. They're selling data to cities for city planners and for, the Vision Zero type of initiatives. So they're selling this to fleets. They're selling these so that ultimately what you can do is, for instance, think about capturing all the lane data, so that the car knows exactly where it's in a lane. So if it drives into a snowstorm, it drives into fog, still all that data has been captured into the localization map data. And then that car knows exactly where it is centered in the lane, even if it can't see the lanes. So this is the type of data that these companies are capturing, whether it's software through the algorithm for vision, or it's radar. So radar can then pick up buildings and embankments and understand, there's a construction zone and things have changed. So this becomes very, very critical data, not only for maps, but really enabling autonomous driving.
So Paul, let me ask you something. So, you mentioned that you work for Magna and you've been working with, so we'll talk about traditional tier one suppliers. And so these are companies that by and large make things, objects, right? So you mentioned
mechanical systems.
Mechanical systems. Okay, so you mentioned Mobileye, which makes software algorithms, and Intel bought them for $15.3 billion.
$15.2 billion.
That's off my point.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mobileye is a supplier to the auto industry, and Intel probably has been to a small extent, but now Intel wants to become a bigger player in automotive, and so there are companies like BMW that are working with Mobileye in terms of developing these systems. What does it affect in terms of traditional tier one suppliers when you have companies like Intel saying, we'd like to get into that too?
I think you see that everywhere. So for instance, back in 2010, we would have at Magna valued Mobileye at about a $400 million company. 4 years later, it goes public for $4 billion. And then 3 years later, it's $15 billion. And this shows you a company like Mobileye, which basically supplies the software algorithm for 60-70% of the vision systems that are going into cars. So this is just a part of that business model. And that's why it makes it very attractive for a company like Intel to come in. But it's not just the Mobileye's. I mean, think about electric vehicles. So the Chevy Bolt, 56% of the content of the Chevy Bolt comes from LG, okay? Another new entrant, okay? And what are they supplying? They're leveraging the battery pack to be able to supply all the power electronics, the electric motor, the gearbox. They're even supplying the infotainment system. And why are they supplying even the infotainment system? Because of the investment that they're making on behalf of an OEM like GM to be able to give a cost-competitive battery system gives them the opportunity to leverage just so much to be able to be a key supplier. And I think this, as the big electronics companies and the new players like the Intels coming into this, it's really going to change the traditional supplier model and the marketplace for our traditional suppliers who've made those traditional mechanical components.
So, Paul, as I think many of our viewers will know, we're sitting here, and Ford and Volkswagen have announced they're going to have a press conference, Friday morning in New York City, and everybody expects that they're going to announce that they are, in fact, going to share electric vehicle development or the MEB platform that Volkswagen has developed, and probably go in together on automated vehicles. And it's not, and this is by far not the first deal of this sort in the OEM universe, just within the year.
Right.
Talk about how you see the sort of the consolidation of electrification efforts and autonomous vehicle efforts by the OEMs affecting the supply base.
Yeah.
It seems
Well,
like
I
it's gonna have
think
an impact.
that's a great point, because when you start to look at one of the first projects we did when we started our consulting firm was we started to look at doing a number of expert interviews around what is the cost of the core systems of electric vehicles. And for instance, we would, back in 2016, the market price for a motor, inverter, and a gearbox was about $2,000, and they were being bought as individual components. Now, as part of the MEB platform, VW is buying that system for less than $1,000. And I think what's critical to understand is electrical components just scale so much differently than mechanical components. And what you'll see is there's going to be sort of 3 core segments of these common components that can be leveraged not only between VW and Ford, but a number of different OEMs. And scale for these type of systems is so critical to be able to be competitive. So what does that mean for a supplier? If you're not on the MEB platform, which right now is about 3 million units, which is quickly going to go to 4 or 5 million units because of what Ford may be doing to bring scale to that, you're not participating in the dramatic shift that's taken place in the industry. And I think this is the big activity that suppliers have to be aware of today, is that this industry is going to scale with them or without them. And this type of participation is really critical today.
How does electric car architecture scale differently from traditional
so I
scale?
think what you'll
Traditional
start
cars.
to see, and we've done a lot of research in this area, but I think what you're going to start to see is you're going to start to see 3 standard sizes that are going to come out of electric vehicles. And what you're going to see is you're going to see sort of this 40, 45 kilowatt hour type of system. You're going to see a 60 to 65, and then you're going to see a 90 to 95. So if you look at the I-Pace, you look at the e-tron, from Audi, you look at that size, that's a 90, 95 kilowatt hour system. You look at the Bolt, the i3, they're sort of in that middle segment. So you start to see that this is an industry that can quickly scale around those common systems. And really, if you look what China's been trying to do over the past couple of years, is they're trying to put strategies in place to say, well, how do we handle the recycling? How do we do this around the industry? But more importantly, I believe the Chinese industrial policy is much more focused around, if we can start to scale an industry around this basic commodities, we as a country, which are going to be producing 36 million electric vehicles here in the next 10, 15 years, the whole industry has to start to shift towards our architecture. It's all power power semiconductors, lithium ion. These type of things are all what they're really working to build into that. And I think what you'll start to see is the industry will start to scale around that and use platforms like the MEB to say, okay, we can further drive down cost and we can make these systems much more competitive.
Paul, okay, you said that companies need to be on the MEB program or
Because it's
platform.
it's so important.
Does this then mean that Volkswagen becomes a supplier to the entire
I think
automotive
that's
industry?
Actually, what they've been pitching, so they have for the past year been going out to other OEMs and saying, hey, if you want our platform, that's great, because they're going to get the benefit of the scale impact also. Because that's just going to help lower prices. I mean, think of, ICCT did this great study looking at battery technology, and basically they're forecasting, basically a kilowatt hour, is going to get down to about $100 for a battery pack in the next 10 years. Well, look at where LG and GM already are. They're already at 145. Now you start
That's at the cell level.
Yeah, at the cell level. But you start to look at that, and you start looking at the number of gigafactories that are going to start coming online to build this. This is only going to continue to improve the competitiveness of those type of systems as you build scale. And that's the one thing that, coming from the powertrain space like Magna, you'd look at everything and it's a huge capital investment. No, it's incremental investments once you got that scale in place and you're, adding to semiconductors, or you're adding to the manufacturing of lithium, because it's not sizably different. It's not different. And this is the one thing I don't think people really appreciate, is that traditional suppliers cannot just say, hey, tomorrow we're going to be in the lithium-ion battery space. They can't compete with Samsung, LG, BYD, all these organizations that are really material companies. I mean, even a year ago, Bosch was considering making something, like a $20 billion investment, and they considered it for about 3 months. And they recognized, hey, we're not a material company. That business model is just very different. So I think we're on the verge of seeing these new entrants come into this in a very big way, because they're willing to make these huge investments on the behalf of the OEMs. That's going to give them incredible economies of scale, and that's really going to change the competitive dynamics in the industry.
Paul, it seems like, though, the challenge right now for anybody who's in the auto business, and I would think especially suppliers, is that the profits in the business still today are in some of the oldest, we were talking about this, the oldest concept vehicle, body on frame, V8, rear drive, now packages a pickup truck or a large SUV. There's zero profit, there's no profit, negative profit, red ink in the, sort of the future stuff that you're talking about for the most part. And I wonder how you see the suppliers crossing that Rubicon.
Yeah, I think so. So if you think about the next 10 years, what is it? In the next 5 years, there's the top 10 OEMs are launching 158 new electric vehicles. What is that going to do for the market? Nobody knows. Nobody can forecast what that's going to mean. But think about the next 10 years, what's going to happen in Europe, what's going to happen in China, okay, as far as they legislate this. So think of today the Golf. If you take the Golf and every variation of the Golf, it averages out to 120 grams per kilometer of CO2. Now the Golf has to get to 69 grams. Okay, so it's got to be virtually cut in half in the next 10 years. Okay, I can tell you, there's not internal combustion engine technology that's going to get the Golf to 69 grams. That's the equivalent of going from about, actually 30, 35 miles per gallon to almost 79 miles per gallon. We've seen what's happened with diesel, et cetera. So there's going to be this huge shift for electrification. And I think the real challenge for suppliers in this space is, how do we start to transition? Because especially here in the US, there's the need to make the quarter, the need to make the year, to maximize profitability. But some of these organizations are also going to be starting to face the facts. We've got to start to transition. And I would say that is a series of very difficult strategic decisions that these companies are going to have to deal with over the next 10 years.
Isn't there a problem, though, all this investment going into lithium-ion batteries? I would hazard to guess a decade from now, we're going to laugh at lithium-ion batteries. We're going to be onto solid state or a new chemistry. And I wonder, do we really have to worry about the Chinese dominating an electric industry where nobody knows how to make a profit right now? Nobody at all. And there will be a crossover at some point, but how much red ink are you willing to bleed until you get there?
Well, and I think that's the one thing that, again, what we've studied a lot is the compliance. What does it take to comply? You know, if you think about to comply and where the legislation's going, it's going to be 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 vehicles in the next 10 years to be able to comply with the legislation as it exists here in North America, as it exists in Europe, and as it exists in China. 1 out of 5 vehicles. And that's not a wild card like China coming forward to say, oh, you know what? We're just going to ban the internal combustion engine. I was there in China earlier this year, met with a number of the local OEMs, and they're all planning 2025, we're done with the internal combustion engine. So they're already trying to get 5 years ahead of what their industry may do to ban the internal combustion engine. And I think the one thing is that if a government like that mandates, what is Germany going to have to do to be able to keep their leadership in an industry? They're going to follow with the same ban. You know, so this is the type of activities that may happen globally that you as a supplier or you as an OEM, you've got to have a game plan to say, okay, if these scenarios start to play out, what are we going to do?
I totally agree. You got to have a game plan for it. But what if you can't make money?
Yeah. Well, I think that's right now one of the big challenges is
it gets back to what Joe was talking about.
Exactly.
V8 powered body on frame, you can make a lot of money.
Still makes the money until it doesn't.
Look what also Joe talked about earlier is this whole activity with VW and Ford. Okay, so now what do you have? 6 million vehicles Ford makes. You know, VW is making 12 million vehicles. Why do they have to partner in this? Because they've got to find a way to leverage the investment associated with these key technology shifts, you know, and they've got to figure out how are they going to compete in this future world. And this is why you're going to see this from the OEMs, you're going to see this from the suppliers, you're going to see collaboration in completely new ways, because you've got to figure out. Because the one guy who figures it out and you're sitting there, you know, well, we're going to wait and see how everybody else is going to make money. You're going to be
well, that's a really interesting,
real risk,
that's a really
whether you're an OEM or a supplier.
That's a really interesting point, because Sandy Monroe, who I know is a frequent guest on this show, has not too long ago, he brought a whole bunch of people, journalists and engineers from the industry, in to sort of show kind of the latest version of his teardown of Tesla versus Jaguar versus, you might have seen that. Really fascinating. Partly because what I drew from it, and I think what the point was, is that say what you will about Tesla's sort of business model and its quarterly numbers, which, you know, until now have been terrible, and everybody says, oh, this is an awful situation. The product is superior.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, quoting Sandy now, basically at least a generation ahead of what the other guys have put out on the road in terms of the software, in terms of the architecture of the electronic systems and all of that stuff. And so, you know, in terms of the product, Tesla has kind of figured it out.
Right.
And the question is, when do they start making money? And we'll find out eventually. But if you, I mean, the point's pretty clear. If everyone else kind of sat around and said, well, we'll wait and see if this Tesla thing works. Well, from a product standpoint, it seems like it has. Yeah. And that does seem like a big risk now.
Well, what's interesting is we did a project not too long ago looking at the idea of the centralization of the architecture, the electrical architecture going in the vehicle. And we were talking with an executive at an OEM right after GM was announced to be investing in Rivian. Mm-hmm. And what this OEM said was, oh, that was so smart, because we calculate to build that skateboard like Tesla has, is that it's a 7-year advantage in the marketplace. Now you can understand why Ford came in at the last minute and said, well, we just want to participate with no exclusivity, you know, because OEMs like that see to be able to duplicate that with the way their hierarchies are, the fiefdoms, everything, it's just a completely different animal. but it's a 7-year advantage. Now think of an organization like Cadillac that comes out at the auto show and says, you know what, Cadillac's going to be a pure BEV brand. You know, that skateboard was critical for the Escalade and everything they want to do. And the thing is these are the type of challenges that OEMs, you know, have to think about. Because if you look at that whole concept, it is so many strategies in one, because it is electrification, it's autonomous driving, it is the data collection off these vehicles that Tesla is just showing far more advanced than others. It's mobility as a future. Here is the future of the industry that comes in this skateboard, okay? This is really critical to the OEMs, and it's really critical to the supply base to start to say, how do we participate in this new future?
What happens to the supply base? I mean, we've stipulated earlier that the tier 1 suppliers are really good at making mechanical devices.
Yes.
You're talking about a scenario whereby
absolutely.
Mechanical devices
are gone.
So what happens? I mean,
so I think actually, and again, before we started, we were talking a little bit about this as the example I used with the forgings. So if you look at the forgings, a typical vehicle like a Pacifica, you know, V6, 8-speed, that has 107 forgings in it, in just that traditional ICE engine ecosystem. When you go to an electric vehicle, whether it's the i3, the Teslas, the Bolt, whatever it is, there's 8 or 9. So you have a 90% overcapacitation of an industry, okay? And here's an industry that's only 90 billion globally, okay? And half of everything it does is in the engine transmission ecosystem. So where does an industry like that go? And I think this is the big challenge for mechanical suppliers, because I think what we're starting to see is the big tier ones, Delphi and Aptiv spinning off. GKN is now in the process of being an aerospace company and selling off powder metals and driveline. I mean, Honeywell selling the turbo business or spinning off the turbo business. All the big tiers are already starting to position themselves through spin-offs, you know, really to divest these type of assets. I mean, even look at Federal Mogul and Tenneco. You know, day one, they spin off a $10 billion powertrain business, and what stays core to Tenneco is everything that's not impacted by the ICE ecosystem.
Yeah.
So the big tiers are already starting to shed these assets. The smaller companies, $100 million family-owned enterprises, you know, these middle ground type of companies that are $400 or $500 million, they've really got to start to figure out, what are we going to do? Because the impact of trying to exit or transform are just very shortly, they're going to have very few options.
So I don't know if this is something that you're watching, but you know, probably more like 15 years ago, this town was awash in private equity, agents and fund managers who were running around looking for things to roll up and buy.
Right.
What you just described, you know, sounds like an opportunity, but I don't get the sense that those people are here anymore.
As a matter of fact, I would tell you, so we talk with a lot of PE firms. We do a lot of due diligence projects for PE firms, but the last thing they want to talk about is a powertrain-related business.
So they're not interested in riding that into the sunset.
They're not interested. As a matter of fact, there's a there's a case of Dayco, which is a private equity-owned business. Back in 2014, when I was leaving Magna, they went through their first attempt to a sale process. Then they tried it again a year later, and they tried it again, you know, a third time. I think it was in 2017. The last time, they just took the deal to China. And frankly, they couldn't find anybody to even put in a bid for the business. And why is Dayco, I think, sort of an indication of what private equity is going to do? Is because Dayco makes, pulley systems that go on the front of the internal combustion engine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And of course, what's been the first element to be electrified? All the pumps and all these systems that run off this pulley system. So the market has already recognized, hey, you know what? We're not interested in these type of assets. And this is the challenge that the industry is going to have when it comes to these traditional machining type of operations that go into this traditional ecosystem.
So that, and you have these new players that are coming in
Yes.
that complicate
Yes.
matters
Which
still further.
Actually, then, and again, then think about, there's 75% of the top 100 suppliers are all tied some way to vehicle electrification, whether they're making internal combustion engine components or they're looking to make new components for these electrified vehicles. But 75% of the top 100 suppliers. Now you go to the next 250 suppliers. These are companies that are 5, 6, 7, 800 million that are traditional suppliers in this that don't have the scale. I mean, think of what we're talking about with Ford and VW and the scale they have. Now think of a $400 or $500 million company. What do we transition to if we're tied to this ecosystem? We did some research around aluminum die casting. So there's $650 that goes into engine transmission for aluminum die casting, okay? For an electric vehicle, that goes down to about $200. And basically, the only thing that transitions is the power electronics components that go into that. So now think of, again, you've got another industry like this that is being upended by electrification, okay? What do those companies do? They're going to be chasing, basically $100 worth of power electronics, So this is the type of challenges we see as a result of this shift in ecosystem that starts to come out of it.
So here's a question. So this is a conversation that has been kind of ongoing for a number of years. But is the future now? In other words, are we at the point where the contracts are being not let, or
Right.
Is the future now?
Yeah, well, I think actually one of the things that we're seeing from some suppliers is they're being approached by OEMs who are looking to put long-term contracts together. We were told that an OEM has come to a supplier looking for a contract out to 2030. Okay, and they're tied to the internal combustion engine ecosystem. And the one thing they're saying, hey, we'll sign up to pricing today. We're not going to push for cost downs, et cetera, but we can't guarantee volumes. So this particular supplier came to me and said, what would you do in this case? And I'm like, I'm glad I'm not faced with that decision, because think of the risk, but think about what the OEMs are already trying to do. It's like you were talking about earlier. We have to bridge this gap, okay? I think it was really interesting in the 2018 Daimler annual report. They started to talk about the risks they see with this transition in the industry. And what they're talking about is building a supplier council that rivals what they had in 2008 and 2009 to deal with bankruptcies. And they're already starting to build, reserves for this. Why? Because they don't expect electrification to, hit tomorrow. But over the next 10 years, what they're going to see is there's going to be the risk with suppliers on the downside. So if you think about, like we're talking about forging or aluminum die casters, who are maybe living on a 6-7% margin, and you see that type of decline, there's going to be the risk in that supply base associated with bankruptcy, and then you see a rapid increase that comes with all the new technologies. They're going to have a risk. Can those companies keep up with the cash flow and the rapid investment? So think about this. This was last year. Daimler was talking about this in their annual report. So is it now? I'm arguing those types of organizations are already making these decisions. And I go back to even the end of 2017 when Adam Jonas from Morgan Stanley downgraded Delphi. And he came out and said, electrification's not going to hit tomorrow. But there's already, this idea of diminishing returns that comes with this powertrain business, which creates a headwind for all of Delphi going forward. And then, they weren't the only one to be downgraded. Companies like Schaeffler. Look what's happened to the stock price of a company like Cooper Standard. Okay, this is already, we're already starting to see
It's
the
being priced
impacts.
in right now.
Yeah, the
Yes,
market
yes, we're
investors are
already
pricing
starting
in
to,
right
the
now.
investors are absolutely.
They're ahead of the-
And that's why I say the private equity guys, they see this and they're all waiting for, okay, let's see where prices start to settle before I see an attractive.
They've lost enough money in this town in 2009, right?
Yeah. They've been trained like Pavlov's dog.
Yeah.
We got to take a quick commercial break. Can
Yeah.
you stick around for the
Yeah,
second half
I
of the
can.
show? Okay, real good. We're going to be back in a minute. We're going to take some of your questions. We've got Dr. Data and other news items to get into. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
I was wondering where that was.
Lear Connexus offers a parental controls application with geofencing that sends notifications regarding driving behavior and location, including curfew alerts, acceleration alerts, and speed alerts. All delivered to a smartphone application that includes vehicle location, driver notifications, and a report card of driving history, including notifications when predefined geographic boundaries are crossed. For more information, visit Lear.com.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back. And hey, if you want to keep up with all the latest automotive news, be sure to follow Autoline on social media. Check us out on Twitter @Autoline and @Autoline Network on Facebook and Instagram. But that's one way that you can keep up with everything that we do here. But now, it's the time of the show where we go to Dr. Data.
Okay, so last week we were off because of the 4th of July, which was July 4th, but last week car sales came in, and we may talk about the car sales, but this is I want to look at some different aspect of car sales. So, Katie, could you please bring up the first slide, please? So, I was looking at Western European car sales because that's just bizarre things that I do.
Right.
And so in June, all of these countries in Western Europe had a decline in their vehicle sales, but one. There was just one country
That stood out.
that
sales went up.
wasn't, where the ink wasn't red in terms of car sales.
I'm going to guess Norway.
Norway.
Okay,
And why do you guess Norway?
Because they've had a big electric car surge there. So maybe that was what it was. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm going to say Germany.
Germany, and why?
Somehow I remember reading that sales in Germany were up.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Go ahead.
Paul?
Yeah, I think I remember the same thing. I was just in Germany 2 weeks ago, and I think that was part of the story there.
Well, so just to let you two know that last month, year-over-year, sales in Germany were down 4.7%.
Oh, okay.
So you are
I
not.
missed the headlines.
So much for my memory.
So you're not correct on that. And Joe, I hate to tell you that
Was wrong too.
you were wrong too. That in Norway, the year-over-year sales in the month of June were down 3.1%. So, I mean, not a great deal, but
Okay.
they were still down. But so this is completely wacky. So Katie, please bring up the answer to the question. Ireland.
Oh, really?
So
Really?
Ireland had an increase of sales of 13%.
Wow.
But look, they sold a massive 1,410 vehicles, period.
Some rental fleet.
How bizarre is that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
doesn't
like
make
one
sense at all.
of all of those countries
Yeah.
had a growth in sales.
I didn't realize Ireland was such a tiny market.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's so there you go. I just thought that was so odd
Yeah.
to see something like that. But
So what else in the news, Gary? What else should we be talking
well, I mean, I think we need to talk a little bit about the first half sales, and it strikes me that, and Joe, you probably follow this more closely, but I just had this feeling of
Depends on what country you're talking about.
No, I mean, in the US.
In the U.S., yeah, I think, it's fine. If you can't make money at sort of high 16, 17 million a year, you're in the wrong business. I mean, and I'm paraphrasing, I think it was Bob Carter at Toyota who said that to me earlier in the year, and he's right. So right, I mean, but I think the overall market is fine. I wonder whether in different important segments, profitability is under pressure because they're having to run harder to stay in the same place. You see that in the large pickup segment. There's a lot of incentive activity. You see that certainly in the sedan segments. I mean, that's not a new story. And I think there's some concern, I think, about sort of in inventory levels overall. So going into the second half, what's going to happen with that? But yeah, I mean, overall, it's fine. Don't forget, I mean, unemployment's the lowest it's been in many, many, many years. So it's this weird sort of thing where the numbers are okay, but nobody feels good.
I think the market's going great. I mean, sales are down 1.9%.
But from a relatively high level.
From last year.
Yeah, I basically agree with you.
And if you look at the mix is much richer than it was a year ago. Past car sales continue to crater. More and more people are buying crossovers, pickups, and SUVs. The inventory number is high, but it's come down from where it was. It was over 4 million. Now it's around 3.9 million, so it's come down. Incentives are not out of whack whatsoever. They're pretty much on. And what I keep finding amazing is so many analysts keep forecasting the market's going to drop, and they keep forecasting, and the market's just not cooperating with them.
Well,
it's pretty strong.
There were some anomalies, though. I mean, so you mentioned crossovers, and so I noticed that. So for the first half of the year, the GMC Terrain, which is a fairly new vehicle, and I think it's a handsome vehicle, looks good. It's down 8.9% compared to what it was last year. And then, and I remember when this was all happening, and we kept talking last year about how on fire the Nissan Rogue was. I mean, that thing seemed.
They put the fire out?
It just seems unsafe. Yeah, I mean, so year over year, I mean, for the first half, they're down 18.6%.
Yeah. Well, Nissan's got a lot of issues.
There are a lot of crossover SUVs in this market, and that at some point that may become an issue. That if you're not the newest and spiffiest, that the newer model is going to take the wind out of your sails. I mean, and you'll embarrass me because I don't know the numbers, but I mean, these new Hyundai and Kia three-row SUVs, the Telluride and the Hyundai one, I can't remember the
Palisade,
name.
right?
Yeah. I mean, they're very good-looking vehicles. I mean, Hyundai was not present in those segments before. They rectified a pretty profound strategic mistake of a few years ago. Well, okay, so they're in there, and they weren't. And so maybe that's part of it. It's just a more competitive segment.
So what happens? Is there going to be like huge cannibalization because you're going to have so many
CUVs? Yeah.
CUVs?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, the margins are going to come down. As long as there was a shortage, margins were great. Now the market's getting
there's no
flooded.
shortage of options.
In a year, it will be flooded.
Absolutely.
And the overall market's not growing, so it's not as if you're basically swapping share among segments and among nameplates. It seems like. So again, I agree with you, John, that it's not like the sky is not falling, but I think it's going to be harder if you've got the oldest vehicle or the least well-equipped vehicle, and I mean it's going to be a little bit more of a buyer's market, I think.
Oh, I could not argue with you at all. I completely agree.
And to the point of electrification, I find it very interesting that for the first half of the year, the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, they sold 29,319, and for the Prius, 29,241. So basically, by about 60 units, the RAV4 hybrid outselling all of the Prius products.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at it on a month-by-month basis, the Prius numbers are just nosediving.
Is that right?
Yeah.
People are buying the RAV4
In
instead.
fact, look it up. The Ford Fusion hybrid now outsells the Prius 2-to-1.
Wow.
Which shows you how far. Now, I'm not counting the C and the plug-in. I'm just counting, hybrid to hybrid.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to me how fast the Prius has fallen. But I think it speaks to how good the RAV4 is, too.
Well, and also how the Tesla Model 3, and again, it's not at all a one-on-one competition, but I suspect a lot of the people who have bought a Prius 5 years ago or 6 years ago would go to a Model 3 today.
I think you're right. That's what's been interesting about the quote-unquote green segment, is even though sales of BEVs are skyrocketing. The total green segment, including plug-ins and regular hybrids, is growing a little bit. But it's, I believe, people coming out of hybrids going into BEVs, or coming out of plug-ins and going into BEVs.
Right. Well, we've done, we've done a lot of work in the areas of looking at the cost and where do you get sort of cost parity, and where does the costs associated with a battery electric vehicle and an internal combustion engine start to cross. And it'll be the next 5-6 years here in the U.S. with the forecasts that are associated with the batteries and sort of these economies of scale that we talked about. But what's interesting is what we see and what we forecast with suppliers is that hybrid segment just sort of stagnates where it's at. That it's sort of a middle ground for people to go to, like what you're talking about. I'm not sure, but once they start driving these plug-in hybrids in sort of full electric mode, and they start to say, oh, the performance, I like this, they're going to transition. And the hard part about hybrids going forward is you got dual architectures.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be this $4,000-$5,000 cost penalty associated with dual architectures that it's just going to be a middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're right. And then to the extent that regulation puts a thumb on, or thumbs plural, on the scales for that also puts that at risk.
Right.
If only a full electric or a plug-in gets the credit, or gets the license plate if you're in Shanghai, it kind of puts the thumb on the scale.
Right.
So speaking of crossovers, one of the things that you've long been curious about, the Toyota Mazda joint venture plant that is going in, and Toyota had said that they're going to put a Corolla in there, and you're like, why? Why should they do this? This is crazy.
Well, guess what?
So they must be watching the show.
They're watching Autoline After Hours.
Because they decided that they're going to put in
Gary and John said we shouldn't do this.
So they're going to put a small CUV in the plant, and that has been Mazda's plan all along, to put a small CUV in there, and now they're doing that.
And commensurate with that, VW just built the last Beetle,
Right.
and they're going to replace it with a
Small
crossover.
CUV.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that those both stories basically came out yesterday, the same day as we were taping, the same day, and I thought, if you needed a sign of the times, if you just sort of woke up yesterday and were wondering what's going on in the vehicle market, this would be your answer. It's like the Corolla, one of the best-selling vehicles of all time, the Beetle, one of the best-selling, if not the best-selling vehicle of all time, certainly right up there. Both of these names are being shunted aside in favor of SUVs, or an SUV shape in probably roughly the same footprint, or shadow wheelbase,
Right.
but not in that traditional format. And there's a really interesting moves in both cases.
So in line with the Beetle, and you had a very interesting observation yesterday, John, when I was pointing out to you that Elon had said that there's going to be no refresh for the Model S nor for the Model X. And you said, well, but look at the Beetle. So for many, many, many years in the history of the Beetle, there was no change at all. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, even when it was in the U.S. market, the changes were infinitesimal. And they even made a big deal out of that in their ads.
Made fun of themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
For 1960, you get a gas gauge.
Yeah,
That kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah. And so I begin to wonder, is that perhaps something that is going to be happening in the industry going forward, that this annual new model change or big mid-cycle refreshes are become irrelevant?
Well, Tesla can do you're saying the same thing, I know it. Tesla can do a model change overnight. They can upgrade. They can certainly upgrade the way the IP, what's in the IP screen. They can upgrade functionality. They can do all that stuff over the physical body of the car. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. The physical body of the car, those cycles may lengthen out, right? Because if you can do the electronics upgrades.
Well, think about it. A few months ago, they came out with the pothole feature. They've come out with, they raised everybody's vehicle overnight. I mean, that's the model year changeover of the future, but it comes It comes on a Thursday, sometime between, 12 and 5 a.m., depending on where you are. And that's, again, as we're talking about, that's the future of our industry, is that type of change and that type of pace.
And I don't know what it costs to develop a software feature like that. It's obviously not nothing, but it's probably not the same cost as doing a new fascia, right?
Right.
It's less, almost for sure.
Right.
And I think that is...
But here's my question. Okay, the Model S came out in June 2012. Can you imagine if General Motors or FCA or any other company said, that car was good enough in 2012 as it is today, and we're not going to change it?
Well, in certain cases, they kind of have, although I'm sure it wasn't really what what they really wanted. But if you get it right the first time, maybe you can get away with that.
It depends. I think Tesla's in a very special spot. And they did do a facelift. Remember, they had what I thought was a very ugly grille. We got a picture of the car up now, which I think is a very handsome, very unique kind of grille. If grille is even the right word for that. But Volkswagen made a strategic decision in the late 1940s. No, and it was Nordhoff, I think, was it Walter Nordhoff, who ran the company then, said, we're not going to do annual styling changes. We're not going to do, we're just going to make this car better and better and better. And if you stick with something long enough, boy, can you get the quality to be rock solid on it. But Volkswagen, again, was sort of a counterculture car. Certainly in the US, it was a counterculture car. And it had this following that it was a niche, but it was a big niche. Same with Tesla right now. It's a niche, but it's a big niche. And they've got the added advantage of what you just talked about, Joe, of the over-the-air updates. But, if you go out to the Bay Area now, Model S's are everywhere. Model 3s are everywhere. X's are around the place, too. The first guy that drives down the street in an all-electric Porsche Taycan, people are going to go, whoa, I got to have that one.
No, I agree with that.
And this is why the industry back in the 50s and 60s had the annual styling change. It's why department stores changed what's in their display windows. It's why people update their websites. If you have the same thing again and again and again, it just doesn't sell as well as something that pops, that's fresh.
Also, I've learned the hard way not to take everything that Elon says on his Twitter feed totally at face value. He's free to change his mind, right? And if in 2 years, you're right, that the European brands start to make some inroads, what do you know? There might well be a facelift of the Model S,
But if you
right?
think of the Model S and you look at, they've minimized the instrument panel, and that's a look that every OEM will talk about. We want that look. There's more space. We like that minimal look. The seats don't really change going forward. So what do you really need to change besides the software? They've already got the skateboard. They've already got the electrical architecture that they need to be able to collect tons and tons of data. So what really needs to change except for maybe the exterior styling that sort of goes with it?
And maybe not even that, because the way Tesla is doing it is they're not going to refresh this model with a new body. They're going to come out with a totally new one. So the Y is the next one. Then the pickup truck's going to...
Well, right, and that's the other thing. Look, you just hit on what the real reason may be. It may not be some complicated kind of vision of what model change means. It may just be, look, we promised the market a Model Y, we promised the market a Semi, we promised the market a Roadster, we promised the market, a mobility service. Those things all cost money. How much do we have?
Right.
Let's not bother refreshing the look of the Model S.
The dyes we have are just fine.
Okay, so that's
Great
an interesting
dyes.
point. So Paul, do you see if Volkswagen and Ford come together and announce that they're going to be on MEB and so on, that essentially we're going to see something going back to like the Model T, which didn't change a hell of a lot over time, and basically they're going to say, you know what, this is our electric small vehicle, our electric medium vehicle, our electric large vehicle, and we're going to have this this pickup truck thing that we're doing with Rivian.
Yeah, but look at what, over the past 10 years, VW's been doing with platforms. So the MEB platform is still scalable to different, sort of chassis configurations, et cetera. But they get scale in where there's the majority of the cost. So my sense would be they're always going to have different bodies. They're going to have different styling elements to do, just like we talked about. When the Porsche Taycan hits the market, people are going to step back and go, that's a beautiful, electric vehicle, and it's got autonomous driving features, and it's got.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be compelled to buy, you're going to be compelled to buy for those things that start to connect with you emotionally. And I think to think that for private owners that's not going to happen or continue to happen, I think is naive. But for the robo-taxi services, I think it's going to be exactly that.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
And that's a completely different animal.
Mm-hmm.
And, the motivation for the OEMs are very different. And, getting into a vehicle where you can say, hey, it's cost me a buck an hour, which is sort of the goal and the objective of all these OEMs, styling's not going to matter. It's going to be, how do I capture, user data? How do I capture, environment data? How do I do all these things?
Package internal space in a super optimized.
Package internal space.
I agree.
all these
I
things.
agree with that, and I do wonder whether if you wake up in 10 years, you're going to see a market that's much more segmented in the way that you just described, where for personal use there's a huge premium on styling and ultimate technology, but then there's going to be this very defined, commercial car segment, robo taxis and all of that, which.
Right.
I think
you step
see it
back
happening
and
in
think-
China. Didi's already talking to the automakers to try to do that
so
kind
you
of stuff.
step back and you think about an OEM. So we did a study recently, and an OEM's talking about, for one of these self-driving robo-taxis, there's 100 sensors that they've got to put into these vehicles. So it's not just going to be the big, ugly LiDAR systems. I mean, they're going to be all over the place. So styling isn't going to be the motivation for these people. What it is, it's cheap transportation. I can get in this, I can go, I can have the time to do what I want to in the interior space. That's going to be the driver. It's not going to be, the styling of the vehicle. And, I think when you start thinking about Tesla, is Tesla, does this somehow play into that broader strategy that they have also to start the Model 3? They're going to convert into this fleet of sort of vehicles that if these come off a lease, we're going to take they're going to be used for a whole different type of purpose than, just private vehicles.
But doesn't this drive scale down, Paul? I mean, that if we look at this future that includes the robo-taxis, that the number of units annually will be significantly decreased?
So again, this is something that we've looked at because a lot of suppliers are starting to say, hey, do we hit peak auto anytime soon? And the idea of peak auto is just this mobility as a service. You start to drive less and less vehicles. And as we've done the research in this area, what we really see is, the lifespan of a vehicle, let's say it's 200,000 miles, okay? What are the OEMs really doing to extend the life cycle of the vehicle? The utilization may increase, but still the lifespan of a vehicle may be only 200,000 miles. Now, a wild card in that is when you go to an electric vehicle and you've got, instead of 150 moving parts, you've got 25 moving parts. This is going to change. Can you change out the battery after the battery starts to wear out? Can you effectively do that and sort of get a whole new life cycle out of those vehicles? These are all the wild cards sort of the industry, but I think they're really good questions to ask again. When does peak auto hit? And does the robo-taxi and these type of self-driving vehicles drive some of them?
Yeah, no. Some of the forecasters who I was listening to over the last month or so, LMC and others, said in certain markets peak auto has already happened, and the numbers kind of say that's right. On the other hand, I remember when people were talking about peak oil.
Yeah.
And like that didn't quite work out the way people thought either. So yeah, I think you have to be careful about that. But if you look at what's going on I mean, cycles haven't been repealed. I think that's clear. I mean, the Chinese market is exhibit A of that now.
But Joe, one of the things you were saying earlier, and I remember if we were on air or off air and you're talking about it, I mean, that Ford is looking to become more of a mobility company.
As Paul said that, but that's what they say.
And doesn't that imply that they're looking at things like being a purveyor of robo-taxis or
I think they're absolutely no. I mean, they're almost all of the auto companies are doing this, and they're absolutely experimenting with that and trying to figure it out. I guess my question is, I don't know that I assume that the auto companies will be best at figuring that out. I mean, managing large inflows of data and managing complicated, sort of routing of cars and of vehicles here and there is actually something that companies like Amazon and Google and do better than the auto companies, and building the capability to kind of do that and run huge server farms and all this other stuff is very difficult, and competing for the people who know how to do that is very difficult. I mean, and so I think that's all. So yes, absolutely. I think they're serious about, oh my gosh, revenue per mile is going to go from owner-driven vehicle to, a passenger in the back. How do we participate in that? I mean, Ford, just on its own, has all kinds of experiments going on in that area, with vans here and there. But some of them, I think, that one of their van services, they basically they basically folded up and said, this isn't working for us. We don't know how to do that. So I think it's going to be very challenging for these companies. Because again, I mean, what makes the money? It's none of that. It's the F-150. It's the F-Series, not just the F-150, F-Series.
Right.
And
well, I think one of the things that you're, again, with these type of disruptions that we're talking about, if you're not participating, as an innovation incubator in these type of areas, the big disruption could happen, especially when you see, as we were talking about earlier, you've got companies like Intel, LG, Samsung, Waymo, you name it, Apple, they're all coming into this space because they see just a rich environment for things like we were talking about earlier, like data. There's just so
and they can
many
outspend
different.
all the
Well, and I mean, their capital, I mean, it's not literally true, but relative to the auto companies, their capital is free. I mean, if Waymo wanted to do an IPO, some Wall Street house is well over $100 billion valuation. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's 90 after Uber came in and kind of gave a little reality. But it's probably bigger than the market cap of Ford or GM. And they would.
Then game over.
Yeah. I mean, they have the capital to.
Right.
Hey, look, we're at the top of the hour. This is probably a good place to wrap up the official part of the show. But stick around afterwards. We still got questions that came in from the audience watching live. We'll get to some of that. But for the official part of it, Paul Eichenberg, thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Really good.
I enjoyed this.
Excellent discussion. Joe, always great to have you on board.
Great to be here.
Too.
Thanks.
And Gary, it's fun to do the show with you.
it is. Thank you.
Okay, we're wrapping this up for right now, folks. If you're hanging around for the live part, we're going to get to your questions.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv. Okay, we're back, and as promised, questions. I know we've got questions for everybody here, but Paul, we're going to start with you. South Carolina Osprey, you were talking all about the data.
Yeah.
He wants to know who owns it, and can the car owner own any of this?
Actually, so this was something we were talking before we came on air, but specifically, there's certain car companies that want to own the data. So GM, BMW, Daimler, these are examples of car companies that want to own the data. There's others like Renault that, expect the suppliers, like we were talking about, Mobileye, Aptiv, Bosch, to own the data. The hard part is there going to be, and I haven't seen this in the marketplace, is there sort of a middleman who's going to collect this data so that the owner can monetize that? I would tell you, for these companies that are putting these data server farms in place and the over-the-air update capabilities and all of these things to be able to gather this data, I think what you're starting to see is that's a huge investment. So it's an interesting question as far as, well, will there be a middleman who will allow individuals to sort of participate that way? I haven't seen that yet. Just on a side note, I'm on the board of a company by the name of Hayden AI. And Hayden AI's strategy is they're going to take camera radar data and they're going to sell that to municipalities, at which an owner opts in to be able to share their data. And then if the municipality uses that data and they find a speeding violation, they find some type of traffic violation, the business model is half of that goes to the city or the municipality that they're participating with, half goes to, or then a quarter goes to a bounty for the individual who opt in, and then a quarter of that goes to Hayden AI to continue to build the business model. So there's models like that are starting to evolve, but I haven't seen many of them
All
start
right,
to emerge.
explain this for me. I'm
Yeah.
a little fuzzy on this. So, okay, so I'm driving my car.
Yes.
I have opted into
Yes.
this thing, and I have I go over the speed limit.
So that's something different.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So if you think about basically here in the U.S., every vehicle is going to be standard with automatic emergency braking, which requires camera and radar technology. And what does camera and radar technology allow you to do? It allows you to be able to identify speeding. Camera can identify a license plate, and that data can be sent to a municipality.
So I'm driving behind John,
Yeah, he
and
could
my
be
car,
speeding.
my
He could
car
be
just
speeding.
nails him.
He could. So this is actually, and there's a number of uses, not just traffic violations. So think about there's an accident. Now, if you opted in, you may be able to help that municipality where they can go back through a file and start to see, well, who drove by? Who saw that? Who recorded?
Really interesting privacy
So,
implications
yes,
for that,
there
right?
are
I mean, there's a
absolutely.
lot
And
of
And that's one of the
privacy
next
implications.
questions from David Grisco.
Yeah.
What about all the surveillance
Yep.
capitalism? And he talks about the commodification of personal information.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you see, car companies like Ford Motor Company are already capturing 100% of the data from the vehicles that they produce. So it's already taken place. If you look at somebody like Tesla, Tesla came out not too long ago to an investor, to make a 3-hour investor presentation about autonomous vehicles. And they said for the past 2 years, the Model S's that we've been selling have had 8 cameras. And we've been capturing all that data. Okay, so the privacy issue is already out there. I mean, think about this: the Super Cruise has a camera inside the vehicle,
Watching you.
watching you to make sure you're engaged and you can take over, the autonomous driving feature as soon as possible. So Pandora's box is already open.
Can we put my own digital watermark on my data so I get a cut of the action?
Yeah.
I want some of this money that my data is generating.
So again, I would say I haven't seen many of those models other than what I've been doing with Hayden AI. I haven't seen
I'll
many
tell you
of these
why.
models.
Because no companies want to get
Right,
me
right.
a revenue stream off the data. So-
Not at all.
Is this analogous to, okay, when you use Google or when you use whatever, that you agree to something?
Yeah.
No one ever reads it,
Yeah,
but
well, you opt in.
you want to use
You
it,
opt in.
you agree to it.
So basically, again, if you want to use the autonomous driving feature for the Super Cruise for liability reasons these things, you opt in. And this is what the OEMs expect going forward, is that these type of activities, so that they can, think, you're going to get into a vehicle, it's going to identify you versus your wife. So it's going to position the seat to your preference. It's going to change the radio to your preference. It's going to, set the air conditioning, the seat heater like you want it. All of that personalization is going to come from your identification. Okay, so they're expecting you're going to opt in for those type of features, but at the same time, well, we may be able to sell some of that information as a result. And this is the thing, there's going to be this balance between exactly what we're talking about is, do I opt in because I want these features? I mean, think of all those Tesla drivers who are like, whoa, wait a minute. I've been a driving sensor for Tesla to be able to monetize, this information in a number of different ways, and we never knew about it. So it's happening, and I think, legislation is going to catch up.
Yeah,
at a later
I
date.
think that'll be really interesting to see how that shapes up because, right, I mean, your payment, John, is if you owned a Tesla, is all the cool stuff that the Tesla does. That should be enough for you. But it
it's
sounds like it
not.
might not be because
because my
you're-
phone's taking my data, and it's everywhere,
But I
right?
think,
And I think people would have less of a reluctance to share their data if they made money off it.
Right.
Well, or if you weren't liable for civil or criminal penalties because the car is watching you speed or watching you misbehave or whatever. I mean, those are the other things that go on.
So again, if you step back, and I'm surprised if you haven't had this as far as a discussion here, is there are some OEMs that think the future of the business model is data monetization.
Absolutely.
And so we were meeting with a very large European OEM about a year ago, and actually the gentleman who was responsible for tech scouting, and he said, within our OEM, he's like, I'm not necessarily one of them, but everybody thinks this is the future model, okay? So I've seen studies, I've seen reports, $5,000 could be the revenue stream for an OEM per vehicle. Now think of, you're an organization like VW, you're making 12 million vehicles? Holy cow.
Yeah.
It's more profit than off the cars.
Yeah.
Well, you might make more money from that than you do from selling the car in the first place, right? That's sort of,
And I think this is a generational thing that the
Yes.
aforementioned millennials who think nothing of giving their private information away to Facebook,
Right.
why would they care?
Right.
Okay, back to the questions from the audience. Big Barney noted that you were talking about Mobileye and others collecting data. How many vehicles are out there? Do you
Well, I think, one of the things to think about at CES, and we talked about this before you started the show, but at CES, what Mobileye was able to do was Mobileye was able to map the entire country of Japan in the course of a day with just what they have in Japan for Mobileye systems. So now, again, think about what's happening here in just the US. You're going to have automatic emergency braking, which is basically being mandated through all the OEMs. I think it's by the end of next year.
Yeah.
And what are you going to have in that system? You're going to have a standard camera that can do object detection and classification, and you're going to have a radar system. And who are the suppliers that are participating in that? Well, Mobileye has 60% of the market, so they're already have that capability. And then you've got these other organizations like Aptiv and Bosch who are
right.
already doing this. So it's big in the supplier world because of what it does, but it has a lot of different implications.
and it'll be interesting to see how those suppliers, what sort of the make or buy decisions they make. Because once you're harvesting all that data, there are companies that are better, for instance, at sort of analyzing traffic patterns, which you get a lot of data about traffic, right? But there are companies that are better at analyzing traffic patterns because they've been doing it than maybe Bosch or Aptiv are. Now, they may disagree with me, but I'm just saying those kind of, it'll be interesting to see, well, we've got all this data, what can we do with it? Maybe we need to do a partnership, maybe we need to do an acquisition or some kind of a thing. It'll be interesting to see how that works.
Well, but then again, as we were talking about, Tesla has come out and said, well, we've been doing this for the past 2 years. This is why every Model S we sell comes with now 8 cameras. So the fact of the matter is, again, the legislation's going to catch up to the market, if this really becomes an issue like it has in Europe.
Speaking of make-buy, Dave Tuttle, he sent us several questions. I think we answered a number of them already in the course of the show, but will OEMs bring battery cell manufacturing in-house, or will they buy?
Actually, so my sense is from all the work and the research that we've done is they're relying on partners, to really make the cell manufacturing. So you look at Panasonic. Panasonic's, has the partnership with Tesla, Toyota, others. LG, as we talked about, Samsung, is making huge investments. So I think what you're going to see are those type of organizations making the investments on behalf of the OEMs. And then what does the OEM do? The OEM basically takes that labor force that they had making internal combustion engine components. They have to put them to work some way, somehow. And what they are going to be are the individuals who are assembling the pack. So they're bringing in the water lines for the cooling, all the components that go into that to build the pack. But ultimately, the OEMs do not want to be in the cell manufacturing business.
Hey, we got a phone call here, too, from Clem. Carmen, let's bring that one in.
This is Clem Zarowski from Delmont, Pennsylvania. My question is, if the electric car is going to take over transportation, why are they keep drilling more oil wells and keep exploring for more oil? What are we going to do with all that oil if the cars are all going to be electric? Thank you.
Well, Bloomberg NEF, or ENF, or whatever it is, the energy part of Bloomberg says there's going to be an oil glut around 2025.
There's kind of an oil glut right now, depending on the day, right?
Oh, right. No, there is a kind of a glut right now, but they're talking about even more than what we got.
I mean, I'll just quickly say, to me, that's exactly the sort of disconnect that we see right now. I mean, that like today, the most popular vehicles are larger vehicles that still burn oil of one kind, in one way or another. What's going to happen in 10 years or 15 years, who knows? But, right now, still.
Yeah, but what I would say in response to Clem's question is, I think they're still going to be selling pickup trucks in Montana, okay? And I think that's clearly for the next 20 years. But I think what's going to start to happen is, and we did some research in this area, the difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration as far as the EPA targets is about 3.5 million electric vehicles by 2030, okay? So if that legislation got reversed and we went back to an environment where we're going to have 3.5 million electric vehicles, and this is what states like California are continuing to drive, and I see now 23 states have joined. If that happens, what's going to happen, the pickup truck is going to start to subsidize the electric vehicle. And I think that guy who's got to have a pickup truck in Montana, like it or not, is going to be subsidizing electric vehicles because of the way it's going to be legislated. And I think, again, this is the difference of the European, or our market here versus Europe, China, that don't have truck markets. They don't have, a large SUV market like what we have here because of gas prices, the way they are here versus other areas of the world. So, but I think here, specifically in response to Clem's question, I think you're going to start to see these internal combustion engine vehicles are going to start to subsidize the legislation.
I would argue it's already started.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Barry Rector, I'm going to throw this to you then, Joe, from Indianapolis. Any thoughts on the passing of Ross Perot?
Yeah, and this will date me, but when I early on in my career covering the auto industry, Ross was still around. He'd left GM, but he got into a lawsuit with GM because he wanted to form his new company, and he got into a beef with EDS, which is part of GM. Yeah, I mean, before he became a figure in national politics, he was a disruptive and I think in a lot of ways prophetic figure. In his criticisms of GM when he was a director, and the infamous line about GM is a place where they form a committee on snakes instead of just killing the snake, and calling his fellow directors pet rocks, and really, if you go back and read some of what he said about GM. He kind of nailed it. The stuff that GM itself would say later on during the course of their bankruptcy, and then later, and a little later on, in the course of the Valukas report that really was very critical of GM's culture. A lot of the things that around the ignition switch scandal, the mishandling of that, a lot of the things that were said in that report about sort of the go along to get along kind of culture at GM, Ross Perot had been saying, almost a decade or more before, 20 years before. Super smart guy, very colorful. Interesting that he and Lee Iacocca passed from the scene, very close together, because I think they both were memorable and disruptive figures in their own ways here.
In fact, we got same thing from Jim Schultz wrote in. Gary, your thoughts on Lee Iacocca?
You know, much is made of Iacocca being the father of the Mustang, and in some ways he certainly was, and he's got to get credit for that. But I think that he was more the father of Chrysler as we've known it for the last 20 years, and after he was able to get the loan guarantee, which at the time was, you know, unthinkable. And I always thought about, well, how odd it was that when the then Chrysler Corporation and General Motors had to go to try to get the loan guarantees, that more wasn't made out of the fact of, well, it's already happened, and you know what? Chrysler paid it back early. Don't worry about this. This is not an issue. And I think that, you know, his bringing the K car into existence probably had, and the minivan, it had more implications going forward, and then what he did.
Bob Lutz said this, I think I saw this in Automotive News. I mean, buying AMC to get Jeep was, in hindsight, a brilliant move.
And I would argue probably the only M&A activity on an OEM to OEM basis that ever worked.
Well, certainly
There might be one or two others, but that's the one I can point to.
Volvo Geely is in there, but it's a very different. That's a very different deal. But yeah, it's one of the few for sure. It was one of the few, and it wasn't without pain, because in the early '90s, when the economy went down, they had to close a lot of what they had bought from AMC, which Lee Iacocca didn't necessarily handle well, and which he himself said he didn't necessarily handle well. Yeah, I mean, he was a complicated guy, right? But I think definitely, I agree with you. Sort of, he gave us what is now the modern Chrysler. So yeah.
Okay, we got a couple of more questions here. One from Anthony Gauntner and another one from Generalist John. They want to talk about the C8 Corvette, which gets officially unveiled next week. And Anthony Gauntner wants to know, any guesses at the MSRP?
I mean, no. I think it'll.
So will it be
more?
It'll be more than the current car, but will it be much more?
I don't know if it'll be much more. My sense of
the current one, about 53.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't bought one lately, but yeah.
Me neither.
So yesterday I walked past a McLaren that was just parked on the street in my hometown, your hometown, and I looked at that. I said, well, that looks a lot like the pictures I've seen of the C8 Corvette. I've not seen uncamoed photos of it, but it's sort of the same gist. And the McLaren is what? It's 100,000 plus, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, easily. And maybe more, well, a lot more.
To let you into the dealership. Right,
to let you into the dealership. But the point is the Corvette will be a lot less than that. And we'll have a lot of the similar attributes to sort of the European supercars. I mean, mid-engine.
So here's my question.
So it'd be interesting to see how that plays.
Will it be artificially low?
As in GM loses money?
Yeah.
I don't know why they would do that.
Because they want to point out that they're making the most economical supercar on the face of the earth.
Yeah, I guess I'd be surprised to learn that GM was purposefully losing money on that car. I mean, maybe they are.
What do you think, John?
I don't know.
No, I don't think that they're going to deliberately try to lose money on the car or underprice it to what it is. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they could charge a whole lot more, but that's never been what Corvette's been about.
Right.
So I think they'll still make decent margins on the car, but my question is volume. Why are they going with 2 shifts on that plant? You know, they're adding a second shift. As soon as I read that, I thought, oh, because they're going to keep on building the old one. So maybe you can price the C8 higher because you've got the C7, but I can't find out from anybody if that's the strategy. And I actually had somebody from GM hint that they think the demand for the C8 is going to be such that they're going to need 2 shifts.
Do you think it's going to be one of these things, though, where the demand is going to be...
The sports car curve?
Absolutely. Yeah. Why? Why should the new C8 destroy the cycle that's existed since it came out in 1953? A sports car comes out, it does great the first year, does good the second year, and then it dies the next 2 years.
It'll be interesting to see, and it'll also be interesting to see just how that whole segment fares back to the very beginning of this conversation as electrification takes hold, because the sort of the latest and greatest in that world is electric.
Right.
You know, the sort of the
think of
disrupted.
Porsche as a brand. You know, I mean, you sit in a Porsche, you hear that engine. You know, it's just that roar. Okay, now think they are going to produce 50% of the vehicles they produce in the next 5 years are going to be electric. I mean, this is huge. So what does a iconic American brand like Corvette decide to do to be able to compete with these luxury, features that are starting to come in these electric vehicles? It's a great marketing challenge, I think, based on who are they pulling in as consumers.
Yeah.
But
And
the volume's so small that it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't make. I mean, again, I'm getting in trouble for saying this, but I mean, let's remember this is not going to make any difference at all to the bottom line at GM. I mean, it's an image car. It's an iconic idea for a car. Always has been since it was first brought out. But it's not going to change the fortunes of GM.
But GM has come out and said we're going to be an all electric brand someday, company.
Mm-hmm.
So think about that. When do they start to say, oh, you know what, the Corvette has to transition? Those are going to be.
That's exactly. I'm going to be interested to see how that's handled, if it's handled.
Well, I think they'll do it. Look, electrification is great for performance.
Yeah.
For the last decade, it was all about fuel economy, and we had these pokey little electric cars that weren't any fun to drive. Man, Tesla smashed that paradigm.
Yeah, and now these companies like Rimac in Europe are and others are Porsche.
But even if you look in motor racing, all Formula One cars are hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look in sports car racing in the LMP1 category, I mean, the level of technology is phenomenal.
All right, so here's the cold water.
Okay.
So in the first half, General Motors sold 1.4 million vehicles, of which 8,200 were bolts.
Yeah.
So you could lose those bolts and not even notice.
Right.
So I think General Motors becoming an all electric company anytime in our lifetime is.
It'll be a challenge. They put a lot of money.
Think about what
program.
happens. What if China comes out and says, "Hey, in 10 years they ban the internal combustion engine. We're making a transition." I mean, GM is China is a huge market for them. Okay, so this is the thing. VW. Okay, VW's made a $91 billion investment in electrification. This is the research that Paul Leinart did. I mean, you look at $91 billion. Are they hopeful it's going to happen? When you put $91 billion on the line? So, I think we can't just look at it through the lens of North America. We have to look at that from a global lens and understand what these propulsion systems cost OEMs to design and develop, and then what's going to end up having to happen for them to win a market like China and to participate in Europe and other key areas of the globe.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Well, let's see how it all goes. I still come back to nobody can make money on it right now. And there's all this happy talk about the crossover being 2024, 2025. I've talked to other battery experts who say, no, it's going to happen later than that. Maybe not a whole lot later.
Right.
And that's what I come back to is how much red ink are you willing to bleed? And if you're a tech company like an Amazon, a Waymo, an Apple, no problem.
Right.
You'll just put $1 billion down every quarter if that's what it takes. For the traditional automakers, they're not going to make that.
But then in that environment of disruption, how does the traditional either OEM or automotive supplier, how do you win in this environment?
You may not.
Yeah.
You may not.
Well,
Because
the way
going
you
back to
win is you persuade the political class to change the rules because you say, look, here are your choices. We're going to lay off 100,000 people, or you're going to give us a break. And you see that's happened before,
Right.
and it can happen again. I'm not saying it'll work. I don't
Right.
know, but that's what it comes down to. And the German automakers have already started to put that on the table with their government. I mean, fairly explicitly. Be careful what you wish for, because if you do this electrification too abruptly, here are many tens of thousands of Germans who will lose their jobs.
No,
and so
I
that's where
I
that
saw
happens.
in the VDA, so the VDA did the study about a year ago, and they came out and said it was 100,000
Jobs.
labor, that's just gone, okay? That's not replaced with something else because, again, you've got just a very different, type of architecture that.
Well, it goes
that
back
this
to your
impacts.
talk about the forgings.
Yeah.
Just a goodbye.
Exactly.
Yeah, or certainly, I mean, you can make all kinds of arguments that jobs, the number of jobs will stay the same or grow but it's not the same people.
Right.
People who are making forgings are not going to become, most of them probably will not become AI software programmers. Okay.
Well,
maybe not.
One of the things I had a discussion here with a company. So I was in Europe last week. We're having this discussion around autonomous vehicles, and the autonomous vehicle that really is begging, to be automated is trucks, especially long haul trucks, where they can platoon and they can do these type of things to get around the legislation about how many hours can they be on the road, et cetera. This is the first area, but if you look at an economy like the United States, trucking employs such a large amount of people. So all these technology disruptions have significant impacts on the workforce in just a tremendous manner that I think is a social question that hasn't even started to be asked and answered.
No, I agree with you. That's right.
Yeah.
When's the last time anybody used a travel agent?
I did. This year.
I've used well, that's a whole different show.
That's another show, right?
Our automated travel system at the anyway, but look, I agree with Paul about this that as people in the industry consider the technology, I think this the social side of this, you need to not forget about that, and because massive job loss in traditional industries, certainly in a democracy, but even in not democracies, doesn't go down well. Didn't go down well in this country. Hasn't gone down well in Europe. I don't think it would go down well in China either, even though the system there is obviously quite different. So I agree with that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Hey, look, we got to wrap it up. We got to go home at some point.
All right.
Gotta let
Well,
this crew
thank
go.
you very much.
Paul, good stuff,
thank
man.
you.
All right.
This was great.
Yeah, pleasure.
Great.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Oh, we'll have to have you back.